camera down so you
All
guys can
right,
see.
we're starting the stream. And if you can hear us in the channel, if you could type in Slack, let us know how audio sounds. That would be great.
I see no typing yet. Wait.
Someone's typing. Audio
Audio
sounds
sounds
good.
good.
All
Good.
right, we
On the
did it.
first try.
First try. We are getting better at this. All right, welcome everybody to the Kubernetes Office Hours, your once a month community live stream where I grab a bunch of experts like these gentlemen here and we answer your questions live for an hour in Slack on #office-hours. So let's go through intros. Who's first? Bob?
Yep. I'm Bob Killen with the University of Michigan. I'm more familiar with Kubernetes and like on-prem, bare metal, federation, and things of that nature.
All right, and I am Mario Loria. I work for a company called LiquidWeb here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I also run a local meetup group, which most of the people in this chat here attend, and we get together, eat pizza, and we talk about Kubernetes. So we just like to do it, in the middle of the week as well sometimes.
All right. My name's Jeffrey Seek. I'm also at the University of Michigan, mainly a developer. So I focus on architecture and applying application architecture to Kubernetes. And I also do a lot with the job specs, so batch jobs and cron jobs.
And Josh?
Hi, I'm Josh Burkus. I'm on the release team with Kubernetes, currently the release lead for the 1.11 release, which is in process. So I can answer people's questions about how releases work. I work at Red Hat on the community team there. Also, one of my personal passions is running databases on Kubernetes, if people have questions in that direction. And I'm also monitoring IRC for additional questions there.
Is there IRC? Is there a hash Kubernetes
There's a
on
Kubernetes
Freenode?
channel on Freenode.
There is.
It's
Good
not
to
high
know.
traffic, but it's
Right.
there.
Right. That's the second fact that we've learned today.
And one other thing, for anybody who's in the Portland area, I run the Kubernetes meetup in Portland, which meets at least once a month.
Nice.
Awesome. And I'm your host, George Castro. I work at Heptio, where I'm the community manager, and I help organize and run this whole thing and the streamer. So with that, let's get started. We have a few rules on how the live stream works, so let's just go over it real quick. This is a judgment-free zone, so when people ask questions, we want to be supportive of what people are trying to do in the best way as possible. So please be cognizant of that. Obey the code of conduct, even if someone's asking a question that you might not like. We'll do our best to answer your questions, but our panel doesn't really have access to your cluster. So questions that are like really hard to debug, we might end up defaulting with showing you how to get the information that you need and maybe giving you enough information to try to figure out where you can get started. So apologies for that, but distributed systems are hard, networking is hard, so we'll do our best we can given the format. Audience, you could totally help out by pasting in URLs of things that you think might be useful. So links to official docs or maybe a blog post that's related to the questions answered. Please feel free to just toss in any relevant information into the channel. And we would really appreciate that, as would the person who's asking the question. All these sessions are available on YouTube. So if you're using this as a work resource or it's helping you out, please give us some feedback on how we can make this a better resource for you. Because we're always constantly trying to tweak the formula, see what works, what doesn't work. If you want to sit on this panel, if you've gone through a really hairy installation or something and you want to give back to the community, all these people here are volunteers, so feel free to ping me offline and we'd be more than happy to have you. We're always looking for volunteers for this time slot, the West Coast, and for the European time slot, which is much earlier. Let's see. We'll be holding raffles soon as I sort out my raffle code issue, but we're going to make it so if you ask a really interesting question, we'll send you a t-shirt or something cool like that. So stay tuned for that. And as always, feel free to hang out and hash office hours throughout the month. If you have a question that doesn't line up with the stream, we're more than happy to bank it. And then when the stream comes around, we will ask it. And Jeff's working on a really clever bot that will allow us to be way more efficient at this. So with that, feel free to start queuing up your questions in #office-hours. If you're joining us on the YouTube live stream, you could just pop in on Slack and start asking questions. And while we do that, Ralph, can you introduce yourself real quick? Or maybe he's just listening in.
He might just be listening.
Yeah.
Yep.
There he is.
You're completely broken up there.
Yeah, so Ralph's internet is not good today. So, all right, and with that, please feel free to start asking your questions in IRC, and I will start to read them off. In the meantime, real quick, while these are starting, Josh, I take it as the release gets heavier and heavier, your time will be shorter and shorter and shorter. So when we have time here in between questions, I do have some questions for you about release, specifically where you could use volunteers and help. So ViceKey asks, question, I need to run RT proxy on Kubernetes, which proxies RTP, RTCP, UDP streams of port pairs allocated for each session by an outside controller. This requires a large port range to be routed one-to-one to the RTP proxy pods. I know there's a few hacky and kludgy ways to steal the node network namespace, etc., but what would be a real Kubernetes way to approach this? This is probably an issue for anyone that runs VoIP on Kubernetes. Well, we just started with the networking questions right away. That's exactly what happened this morning as well. So any thoughts on this one?
Well, right now, as far as like allocating port ranges and things like that, it's definitely not the best. The way we have sort of done something similar for another application is to use Metal LB and do host networking, but the application itself binds to a specific IP that's taken from the dynamically provisioned load balancer IP, specifically belonging to host, an edge node, if that makes sense.
Okay. And Jeff, were you adding something or just touching your ear?
I was muting myself because dog.
Okay. Let's see if he has a follow-on comment to that. And Ralph, if you have audio now, feel free to introduce yourself.
1 second.
And he is mentioning that he's running Metal LB. Whoa! Someone just posted a lot of logs. All right, so pro tip next time, if you're going to post a really long log, recommend using a paste bin or a GitHub gist in this case. But we'll get to that in a second. So he says he is running Metal LB already in my test. Do we have any more comments here? Or Ralph, I don't know if you can see the question in Slack. And if your audio's bad, maybe you could just be the URL typing in Slack person. And I think ViceKey is adding more information.
Yep.
Okay.
So how would I steal the whole BGP announced IP from one pod?
I think that's going to sort of depend on your top of rack situation there. But the way we did it, it's not with BGP. We're doing it in the layer 2 mode, and we have a set of edge services that the stuff is spun up on.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Any other comments for this one? So I think we're definitely want to get more eyeballs on this. So I think if you could roll this up into a Stack Overflow question and paste the link back in, I'll send an email afterwards and say, hey, here's some questions that the panel was not able to answer, and that will at least get you some more eyeballs on that problem. Does that sound good? And in the meantime, sure, yep, sorry about that. We can't answer everyone, but we will try. And at a minimum, we'll at least get eyeballs on your questions on Stack Overflows to get some help. Hariharan Subram... damn it. Hold on. Hariharan Subramanian. I hope I didn't butcher that. Has a really long question. So it's typed in. He goes, hello, I created a pod security policy, added it to a cluster role. Here's a cluster role binding. RBAC works for the Flannel service accounts, added pod security. When I removed allow privileges equals true from the master, I'm still getting the below error for the Flannel pod. Error syncing pod cannot run with UUID specified privilege container, but disallowed.
I'm asking him what exact release version he has because there's been a couple of recent bug fixes specifically around this kind of a problem for a system looks like Flannel. And I'm wondering if he's running into one of those bugs.
Yeah. 193. Can you kind of explain in plainer words, because his post is really long, what exactly is happening here?
Yeah, so what exactly is happening is he's setting up the Kubernetes system, including Flannel denetworking. But when he removes allow privileged, which you want to do in a secure installation, Flannel stops running because it's trying to escalate to a privileged container and does not have the correct permissions. And it'll take me some time to find this. I know there was a specific recent bug fix around this problem.
Okay.
And I don't know that bug fix is in 193.
Okay. All right. Well, if you want to stick around, we'll loop back around. The rest of you, please feel free to keep asking questions in there. And while Josh searches. Thanks for your question. Any more questions here? And I'm going to start. Jeff, I don't know if you want to start gleaming through Kubernetes users or...
I can certainly begin.
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if we should run this in Kubernetes-users, the channel. Or is that too takeover-y? I don't know. I'm not sure, but it feels like a lot of the questions are in there.
I would agree with that. But I mean, that's kind of like the landing zone for everyone.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If you show up...
Depending on the timing, you might get a lot of other additional noise going on for other conversations too.
Yeah. Like, it would kind of suck if you're just in there trying to get help and you don't have access to, like, watching a live stream at work, right? And you just want to get an answer to your question. So I can understand that. More questions would be great in the channel. And I see Ralph is having touch bar problems, so no surprises there. One of the things I do want to share with the audience here, since we have some time while we're waiting for question, is, and I will paste this in the Slack, is the list of SIGs in Kubernetes. So usually each section of Kubernetes is divided into what are called special interest groups, and each of those SIGs owns a section of code or is in progress of claiming the sections of code that they own. So usually while things like this are kind of general catch-all questions, for the really hairy specific issues, each part of Kubernetes has a SIG associated to it. And each SIG has a public meeting, a mailing list, and a Slack channel, so that if you know exactly where your problem is, you can usually get some really specialized help there. Of course, the problem is how do you know exactly which SIG to go into, which is where things like this go help kind of point you in the right direction. So we have a few people typing here in the channel. Any interesting questions in users, Jeff? Or novice, actually.
There are a couple.
Oh.
So Josh Benner asked at 3:17 p.m. If I have two Kubernetes clusters, is there any reason that their cluster IP ranges should not overlap?
Wait, hold on. So are they doing any sort. He just has two separate independent Kubernetes clusters, or
From the question, that's what it said.
interesting. I mean, off the bat, I say no. It shouldn't really matter as long as they're actually separate.
Yep.
It really should not matter because any workloads that might be talking to workloads on another cluster are using some sort of ingress or external IP address, et cetera, to access. So internal cluster IPs for internal services should never matter, and those should never be accessible from the outside.
There is another question from Nandini at around 2:50 p.m. Hi all. If I have to migrate my existing cluster of 3 masters, 3 workers, and 5 etc. D instances from one location to another, is it doable via simple VM image capture and restore? If the IPs change, how does the master worker continue to work? And is there any documentation on this?
Oof. Ugh, that sounds.
It's dirty.
Yeah, my biggest concern there is etcd right off the bat, I would guess.
Yeah, I actually.
Oh, Ralph has audio. All right.
I do have audio. I was going to actually say it sounds like a use case for Arc, where you back up what's currently there, create a new cluster in the new location, and then siphon workers off. I don't think there's a clean way to move a cluster in place like that. With that, it is possible, I guess, to add more nodes to etcd to keep quorum, but I'd be afraid of things getting hairy with that when moving it, to be honest.
Yeah. So my first guess is that etcd would be the thing I would be worried about the most, right?
Well, I think there might be a way to do it, but the kind of precautions that you would have to take in the path to get there would be tricky. So, for instance, you could take down the primary etcd instance that's defining, writes first, and then take down the read-only, instances and whatnot, and then try to kind of move things slowly and get that going, and then, move everything back in. But it sounds like something that would be much harder to do than just kind of starting a new cluster, possibly.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So. All right, before you move on to the next one, Jeff, I've got one from Vicekey again. A bunch of people here on Slack seem to have issues with their certs expiring and then their cluster's dead and they just bash a kubeadmin or something. But I've not seen a clear guide on what to do when those 1-year certificates die. Asking for a friend as I started with Kubernetes less than 2 weeks ago. First of all, welcome to the Kubernetes community. Thanks for hopping in. So what are we doing with certs? Why don't we talk about just cert lifecycle in general? That helps. I'm
going to look at Bob because he's been dealing with this for the last 2 weeks.
Okay. Well, good. There we go. Yeah.
I'm probably not the best person to ask, but the way we handle everything is, at least for kickstarting kubeadm and all that, is all our certs are provisioned outside of kubeadm. We have CFSSL with a bunch of profiles, and they generate the important stuff all outside of there.
So then do you feed the SSL certs to kubeadm?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And is that a feature of kubeadmin? Do you just pass it, or do you automatically copy?
I forget the flags for doing that.
Yeah. Oh, what I'm saying is kubeadm natively supports you doing that, I guess is the question.
Well, we're running et cetera D and all that outside of kubeadm. So give me a sec.
And Bob, since I am asking other colorful questions, can you update a Kubernetes cluster's SSL certs using kubeadm?
I have not done it, so I can't really tell you.
So you're not past your year yet, is what you're saying.
All our certs are 5 years.
Yeah. So let's...
I know Kubelet and all that should natively rotate their certs.
Is there a cert?
Yeah, they have external CA mode.
Okay. That was going to be my next question, possibly for the Ralphs and the Joshes in the room. Is in the field, you see a lot of people doing external CAs and things like that.
I do see people using external CAs with the kubeadm config file to also set up other things such as HA, as that requires the config file as well at the current moment.
Okay. So generally speaking, is it a best? Would you consider that a best practice then, doing a CA, or is that just organizational dependent?
I think it's organizational,
Yeah.
but I do know that a lot of companies have use cases for certs in other areas besides just Kubernetes
Right.
and tend to roll it all into their master certificate authority.
Yeah, it feels like the larger you are, the chances are you have that at work, and you're just integrating at that point, right? Um,
Yep.
well, hope that answers your question. Moving on, we have new people joining, so welcome to the stream. If you have any questions, just plop them in #office-hours, and we will answer them. Anything new from Kubernetes users, Jeff?
I'm just constantly scrolling up looking for new ones. I have one that we kind of covered earlier today, but I
Okay.
feel it's worth recovering.
Sure.
I think it's Gosim at 1236 asked, hopefully a quick question. Trying to lock memory in Elasticsearch. Tried passing in a limits.conf to etc. security via the Docker image, but it doesn't seem to respect it, as Elasticsearch still complains that it can't lock JVM memory. Have you dealt with the memory locking at all? We kind of covered this earlier today because Java does not respect C group's memory limits. Except, didn't we say that like Java 10?
Yeah, Java 10 does, but all the basic Elasticsearch images and all that don't use that yet.
Right. So you actually have to pass in environment variables that tell the JVM to limit the memory, and even then, it's kind of optional. We have seen several instances of Elasticsearch that will ignore that. So.
I mean, hold on. Is this even with resource limits set?
Yeah.
Kubernetes and what, like it still can go over its allotted usage.
It will have problems because it sees the sort of RAM of the host, the total memory of the host. Node.js actually had that problem too for a while. I think that's been resolved.
That was resolved about a year ago, I think.
All right, just grabbing people from Kubernetes users, waiting for more questions. Yeah, and there were a lot of the Java stuff that we looked up was things of just generic running Java in containers, and not. I don't think we're seeing enough Java 10 in the wild yet to make recommendations or stuff like that.
I'm pretty sure everyone's still on Java 4, so it might take another 15 to 38 years before we see Java 10.
Yes. You're not bitter at all. Shows how you really feel. All right, so we've still got plenty of room for questions. You could just ask them in #office-hours if you're joining the live stream. And that's on the Kubernetes Slack. That's kubernetes.slack.com. And we are still looking for questions in Kubernetes Novice as well. I'm looking through those.
I've got another question in Kubernetes users.
Shoot.
Is kubeadm production ready yet?
We get this question probably every week. Who wants to start with this one?
Yeah, I would say ask him.
Nice work.
Yes, with an asterisk?
Yes with an asterisk. So I feel that kubeadmin gets kind of like a bummer because on the page it's actually like almost too honest because it tells you exactly what the limitations are. And currently the one that people turn to harp on the most is HA on the control plane. But the other features, so if you look, they recently updated the page for kubeadmin with a feature grid that will tell you whether each feature they consider production ready or not. So if you don't need HA, then kubeadmin's been production ready for a long time. There's a full proposal that you can check out if you look at SIG cluster lifecycle on the progress that they're making on HA, and they are making good progress and things are getting better. Despite all that, a lot of tools are using kubeadmin. So if you use Kubicorn, you're using kubeadmin and things like that. So a lot of community work is going into it. It's just people tend to hang on the one, it doesn't do this, so therefore the whole tool isn't useful for me. So what I recommend is, as part of your due diligence, start with that and give it give it a kick. And if you need help, SIG Cluster Lifecycle is always willing to help with kubeadmin issues.
One little minor pro tip: never keep your first cluster.
Yes. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of people kind of blur the lines of production versus HA, as a lot of people think HA or production should be inclusive of HA, and that's just not the case for most software that you see that comes out. I mean, they don't release and say, okay, yep, this is the greatest thing in the world. It supports every use case, and HA is completely inherently there. That's not always going to be the case. So you really have to look at what your needs are, what you're trying to do, your approach, et cetera. And to what Bob was saying, you shouldn't think of clusters as some massive thing that you spend weeks planning for and designing, and before you even spawn your first one. You should really start playing as soon as humanly possible, whether that's in GKE or elsewhere, to get an understanding of what's going on, and especially if you're doing bare metal using kubeadm and whatnot. So
yeah, I think part of the problem is HA is such a kind of loaded term, right? That can mean a lot of things, right? So if you actually look into the kubeadmin HA document, like the amount of use cases keeps, and corner cases and stuff keeps permutating, right? So at some point it's like the whole thing just becomes this complicated
Beast.
thing. So it really, I know it sounds like a lame comment, it depends on your use case, but in a lot of cases, especially if you're doing this like internally at work and you have bare metal and things involved, it's really kind of a homework assignment to like figure out if it covers your use case, which is unfortunate, but
so there's a quick follow-up question
complex.
on this is skipping someone else's question, but it's relevant to what we're talking about here. So what actually happens if you have one master with no HA and it goes away for half an hour? And
yeah, so this, I've accidentally done this before.
yeah.
And one thing that I like, and like I don't know anything, like this is my home lab and I just turned it off. It can't schedule anything new, but Kubernetes has this cool like mantra that it's like, well, if something's broken, everything just keeps on cruising. It's like cruise mode. Forget, Joe Beta has a cool term for it, but basically you can't schedule anything new, but everything that's running stays running. So, unless you're trying to schedule something new. Or it's
right. I think it's effectively you're really in a read-only state, right? So anything is deployed, it's still working. The ingress controller is still running. It's something that's deployed. It knows all of the ingress points, right? Current state at depth, if you will, will continue on, which I mean is great. So you don't have to worry about your resources really, but please don't run with one master if you can help it.
So my thing was a stupid power thing. So at my home lab here, I had unplugged a machine and I hadn't realized it or whatever. I was like, oh no, my whole cluster's what happened, my whole state. And I went to an endpoint and everything was working. And I thought that was really cool. So that's like your cool use case. But yeah, it is really nice. It's the least surprise, which is pretty cool. Man Squab asks, all right, now we're getting some questions. Now we're heating up. I've noticed that on YouTube, it usually takes a while for the live stuff to start to really hit people's radars. He goes, I want to know where I should start with Kubernetes. I'm going to be spearheading its setup and use for new development and potentially migrating legacy products as well. I've done Terraform plus AWS plus Kate's basic tutorials in a home lab, but I'll be servicing a whole org's worth of devs, and I want to start on the right foot. So recommendations for him or her.
So if you're worried about adoption, the biggest thing that I've always said is it starts with the developers. Being a developer myself, when I had a team of devs under me and I was helping them get onto the container foot, I made the transition for them as easy as possible. So it's not necessarily like the technical answer, but it is you want to focus on your dev's workflow before you focus on your infrastructure once your applications are going to be in production. So that's like, make sure that they understand if they're doing local development, stuff like Minikube, if they want to do testing locally.
Telepresence.
Telepresence is another thing that you might want to look at if you're doing everything in AWS and their laptops aren't really capable of running Minikube well. Where I would start is looking at the developer experience first.
Yeah, and where Kubernetes has been a real win on the developer experience, that where the devs became the sort of champions for it, is when we were able to give them a test and staging setup where they could just deploy whatever they wanted. Out of a previous org where that had to be scheduled by someone else. So give them additional freedom, and they'll be really enthusiastic about it.
Yep, and we do that at my organization as well. Use namespaces, use them very liberally if you need to. Create the separation you need, but give them the flexibility to go from 0 to 60 in no time without having to talk to 1 or 2 people or put in requests or ask questions. They just want to get things deployed. They want to figure out if their thing is working and get it moving through the pipeline. So definitely listen to your developers. And then kind of from there, you can build out how maybe operations kind of flow with your cluster. So
yeah, definitely doing some good developer training will help too.
The other thing that comes to mind is if you are the only person really spinning up this Kubernetes cluster, you definitely, if you do have a bunch of developers that are going to be working with Kubernetes, find 1 or 2 that could maybe help you with the maintenance and help you spin it up, just so you're not saddled with maintaining it yourself. And that'll also kind of help build the Kubernetes knowledge within your organization as well.
All right, so that should get you started, but feel free to ask more follow-up questions, because that's a topic we could talk about all day. So we have a few more questions queuing up, and then we'll come back to a follow-up question if you have it. Let's see. P. Vaisberg asks, is there a way to prevent an ingress resource from creating a load balancer?
By default, it doesn't, I guess, but...
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't really understand the question that well. A load balancer is created by you, right? And then an ingress resource is just a resource saying, hey, load balancer, I have a thing you should redirect to. It's kind of like creating a vhost, basically. So maybe a little bit more clarity would be awesome on kind of what he's trying to achieve.
Yep. So P. Vaisberg, if you could kind of give us a little bit more detail there. Yep. And 2 more until I get to yours, Josh. Jay Davis would like to add, I would second that. Having developers deeply involved is a huge plus. Ding, ding. Dustin Bachrock asks, I'm currently placing all of my Kubernetes manifests in a single repo with setup and teardown script that will provision a cluster and then execute all the manifests. This is great for development to bring clusters up and down and spin up all our deployments and services in a single command. And there's a single repo source of truth for the cluster. However, I'm wondering as more and more projects and people start working on our Kubernetes cluster, if it would be better to co-locate the manifests with each individual project and repo. Any suggestions or thoughts on how to manage a cluster if manifests are scattered across many repos?
This is it's like he's just climbing out like Mario. I need to make you talk for 10 minutes about Helm. So this is funny. I was actually just looking at a post, and I'll link it here as well from Q.News on a comparison of all of the utilities that are helping people approach this problem. And this problem really is a packaging problem, or a how do I define my workload problem. So Helm is one of the many tools out there now in relation to GitCube, KSonnet, and I think Scaffold kind of has some of that as well. So it's kind of about this whole CD approach and how do I go from all these YAMLs that I just cubify to something that's makes sense. I would definitely look at Helm. Just start looking at the quick start, play around with that on your laptop, get a feel for what you can do, what it gives you. The idea with Helm is that you template out your workload, and then you can provide a single file that has values and configuration for how it should be deployed. And then you run one command and you deploy it, and all those assets, whether it's some secrets, some config maps, a deployment, and a PDC, those all get deployed, right? It's a single command to kind of handle shooting that out. So I will link this article here. I'm not going to talk too much about it. There's tons of documentation out there. There's #Helm users here in the Kubernetes Slack, which is a fantastic community and very supportive as well. That's a great place to start. That's where we deploy things in production using Helm as well. It's a great utility. So there's a lot more development though coming for Helm in the future, which will be more secure, more efficient, and quite nice. So, and again, a lot of other tools can help you solve this problem. I would definitely look into Scaffold and really see what your needs are. So
this is an area where there's a lot of development happening from a lot of different projects. So it's like, right. I do have a follow-up question on his behalf. It sounds like his existing setup, though, he also has provisioning scripts in there in his repo. So if you're a developer, it also spins up your cluster for you. How would you break that down in a Helm world? Let's just say, do you just have everyone in namespaces and their charts go in different places, or do you not have them provision?
Yeah, this one's hard because it depends on the environment, and it depends on you trusting your developers, right? So Helm, you can specify the namespace at launch time, right, at runtime, and you can specify different options for that deployment. And so if your developer is working on their laptop and they need to be working in the development, cluster, not the production cluster, they need to know that they need to either change that option or maybe make your default option a development cluster. And then when you're actually ready to go to prod, you actually say, okay, go to the production cluster. And that's an explicit -- namespace, is your production. Or, switch your context to the cluster you want, and then the namespace that you want to deploy it to. So Helm doesn't make any assumptions about that. It's all based on your current context or kubectl, which is, they can't do a ton in that realm. It's really up to the end user and how they approach that deployment. If you're talking a little bit backwards, backing up to just creating clusters and managing clusters like QEADM config and whatnot, that's not something Helm does. Helm is, let's say it's at the API level. It's, it works with deploying those assets right to the API. So I'm not sure what other tools might be coming out. Maybe handling multiple clusters. It would be really just orchestration around kubeadm and its options. So maybe there's some stuff coming there, but yeah, Helm is definitely, once you've got the cluster up and running, once you've got users created who have their accounts and can use kubectl from their laptops, that's where Helm really shines. So.
Yep. All right, Dustin, I hope that gets you started in the right area. If you have a follow-up question, feel free to just plop it in the channel. Welcome if it's your first time. Josh, you've got a question from IRC.
Yes, I do. Well, I'm waiting for some follow-up from the questioner.
Sure.
So we'll see. Basically saying, hello, user Dolapevich from Kubernetes channel on IRC.
Who's typing hard? Is that you, Bob? Mute. Someone's overly typing difficult. I think that's you, Bob. Thanks.
Asks, hello, I need to build and join a new node to the AWS Quick Start Kubernetes cluster. I cannot find any information on how to configure the node, and pre-flight check is failing. Any pointers? I've asked him for a copy of the error that pre-flight check is giving him, and that's what I'm waiting for right now.
Is that Quick Start as in Heptio Quick Start? Because we have Ralph here.
Yeah, so that would also be good. But
okay,
if we can't get him to paste the error message, then we're not.
Yeah. So we definitely have time for more questions. Got about 20 minutes left. Anything new in users or novice? Let me look.
George, there was a message from someone named Michael at 432 saying, "What are the cases that a pod spec change is categorized as update?"
Oh, I'm sorry. I must have missed that. Where did I see that? Can you repeat it? Let's just field it now.
Yeah. So here, I'll post the Slack link to it. What are the cases that a pod spec change is categorized as update? And I'm guessing he means an update in that the pod needs to be redeployed.
Okay.
Anytime the pod manifest changes?
Yeah,
the image itself.
It's kind of an odd question because a pod spec change should cause the pod to relaunch, right? I'm not sure what he's trying to get at there, but here I'll add him and ask for more.
Yes, more info there would be useful.
Now, for say something like a daemon set, the spec template is what you're going to want to update in terms of getting a fresh rollout going, especially when you're doing rolling update. Being aware of that is super important. Daemon sets do not fall under the same reconciliation loop per se, so because it's really just make sure this is running on every node. right? So and when you do rolling update, which came out in 1.6 of Kubernetes, you really have to make sure that the change you actually want it rolled automatically, because once the rolling update is going, it's not easy to stop. So.
Okay, waiting for more information. Also ready to field more questions. Let's see. Let's look in users again. Anything new, Jeff?
I'm not in users. Well, there was one, but I answered it really quickly.
Okay. Oh,
It's
sorry.
something
I've
that
got
you'll
dog
hear.
issues.
Oh, it's all good. Hello, S Freak. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. At 433 asked, hello, folks. I have a Google Cloud account and I'm currently migrating services to a GKE cluster. My problem is I have some internal services. How do you guys access those services inside the GKE cluster? Those services can't be exposed to the external world. He goes into some more specifics, but in the end, it made a lot of sense to link telepresence, which is potentially a CNCF sandbox project. They are looking at what that does is it creates a two-way proxy between your local development machine and a remote Kubernetes cluster. And it also does connections between your local development machine and things like Amazon RDS and other cloud-based dependencies.
So what I heard someone talking about this, and one thing they like is it removes the, hey, I can't get Docker's Kubernetes to work on my laptop, or things are too complex, so you kind of give them a telepresence on a real cluster that they can just hack on for development.
Yeah, it's
right?
like if you are using GKE and you don't want to spin up Minikube to do any development,
right?
You spin up telepresence on the cluster and you spin up telepresence on your laptop, and then boom. Right. Another really big use case is developers that don't have a really powerful laptop that can spin up Minikube and spin up their application as well as all of that. Sure. It makes a lot of sense to spin up telepresence because then it's running everything remotely, but it appears locally.
Sure.
So, again, it's that removing the barrier for the developer to do their work.
Sure. Just wondering if you could can you run telepresence on a Chromebook? I'm just curious. Or is that a little bit too much?
I think so.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what the thinnest client you could have to do local development on Kubernetes could be. That's kind of an interesting question. But I guess it would also give people consistent stuff, right? So if I have 10 developers and 2 of them grabbed Minikube a month ago but didn't bother to upgrade, you know what I mean? It kind of helps you keep everything consistent if everybody's using telepresence, right?
Yep.
So I'm really interested in how people are actually using that for real at work. That's a guess, right? So is version skew a real problem that's solving? I don't know. I would be interested to hear feedback from people that are actually doing that.
So we're not using telepresence, but we should, and the reason is because of standardization on versioning and our pipeline. So when we want to test a new change to using the latest version of Docker, right, in our Kubernetes environment, and we roll that out to dev, the developers on their laptops might not be using that exact same version. Their latest might be different from our latest, and so to emulate running, maybe our one of our apps or one of our microservices, it makes sense for them to use something like telepresence and run it in the cluster where you've got the latest kind of changes that are being tried and run through the pipeline for production, right? So it's really making sure that we're doing our due diligence here for ensuring our workloads run effectively on whatever our latest we call it below the API changes, right? Whether it's a node, an OS level change, Docker, or some sort of Kubernetes core asset, right? So like an ingress controller, Nginx upgrade, right? So we don't want them to push a latest, microservice to production that hasn't been tested with the latest Nginx that we're trying to work with. So.
Right. So y'all will test everything then. So even host OS updates, new kernel maybe, or interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we try not to. We're trying to get to a point where every change is accounted for, and you can see it's just like a commit, right? You can see it as it moves through the pipeline as well, and if it impacted things, right? And so we're trying to really get a battery of tests that work well, which is, I mean, it's challenging, right? CI/CD is challenging for any org, but we actually do have the isolation between the environments now. We can see things moving through. But yeah, we don't want to. We've come into things where like, oh, this shouldn't make a difference, and then someone rolled it out, and then all of a sudden things started freaking out. And this is also we treat our nodes more like pets, and so that's also, I think you guys kind of know, we're doing the hyperconverged storage route, right? And so there's a lot more going on with kernel module handling. Reliability of Docker, things starting up at node reboot in case there's a failure. There's a lot more dependence. Hopefully most people don't run into the same problems we do, but testing can help us kind of nail those quickly. So.
Right. Because then you have moving parts on top of moving parts, right? So that's interesting. Telepresence has been on my list of stuff to play around with, but I haven't really had time lately. More questions. We got about 10 or 15 minutes left. You can ask them in #office-hours if you're joining us on the YouTube stream. And we're also kind of scanning Kubernetes users for questions that are reusable. Anything new there, Jeff or Josh? Anything in IRC? Any earlier questions that might be interesting?
Based the error message, it is the Heptio quick start.
Okay,
but
that's good.
Again, without the error message, I don't think that you can really do much. So once I get the error message, I'll actually paste it and proceed with that question.
Mm-hmm.
Hey Josh, just a quick heads up, in the Slack channel, I put there's a script that we use to join nodes during the provisioning of that quick start.
Well, cool. Okay, I'll share that with him.
This is the script to join. It pulls some stuff from S3 and then goes from there.
Cool, very handy. Thanks for that, Ralph. Any other questions? Anything? While we have time, Josh, anything interesting that you're looking forward to in 1.11? What are we on? 1.11? 1.12? It's all
1.10 just released, I think. Right?
Yeah, 1.11. Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Well, because it's a minor feature that I use a lot, I'm actually really looking forward to the overhaul and tremendous performance improvements in Affinity and Anti-Infinity.
Okay.
Just because a lot of people have actually not made a lot of use of node affinity for scheduling pods, simply because once you got to any kind of scale, it was really slow. It really slowed down scheduling new pods. And in 1.11, it will not be anymore. So
interesting.
And for somebody like me who does hosting databases on Kubernetes, node anti-affinity particularly very important. Things like, don't put this on the same node as any other Postgres pod. Don't put this on the same node as a Hadoop pod. And that works fine. It has worked fine on small clusters, but on large clusters, it's been sometimes kind of a problem, and now it won't be. So I'm really looking forward to that. But we're still in so people know about what goes on with release. We're still in the sort of feature collection phase.
Okay.
Where by Tuesday, upcoming Tuesday, the SIGs that work on and working groups that work on features are required to have a listing of the features they expect to complete for 1.11 saved in the features repo as an issue. So that we can coordinate what we're expecting and how it's going and keep an eye on it and all those other things. So, and of course, like anything else, there's a lot of last minute filing stuff. But I would say at this stage, we don't really have a clear idea of what people are expecting to complete in the next 2 months.
Okay. And so that was a future Bob, can you mute? For 110 that you just finished, so I heard an interesting during the status that the number of features for this last cycle was down compared, and it was more of a bunch of finishing of features and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about 110? And I'm going to ask the question because I keep getting this asked. Do you foresee in the near future of something like an LTS release for Kubernetes, or is it just going to keep on?
For LTS releases, you have to ask somebody in the steering committee. I don't decide that. I don't even really discuss that.
Oh, okay.
The So for everything else, I mean, actually, 110 being a little light on features was unsurprising in hindsight
Okay.
for two reasons. Number one, January is always a slow month for Kubernetes development, or at least I say always, given that we only have 3 years of history.
Mm-hmm.
But the previous 2 Januaries were also slow. People coming back from the holidays, they're restarting their work. They don't necessarily get a lot done. Some people work for companies where their fiscal year is their calendar year, and so they're doing budgeting during January. And then the other thing that happened was 1.9 was supposed to be a sort of cleanup stability release, right? As in, it was a short cycle for that release, only 9 weeks instead of 12. And people were expected to focus on bug fixing and getting stuff from alpha to beta and that sort of thing. And they didn't. Instead, we got a whole bunch of new features in 1.9. So at this point, we'd accumulated, I don't know, whatever it is, 3 dozen alpha features that had not been advanced. And so that kind of, I think, forced everybody into stability and advancing stuff on the sort of ladder mode instead of working on brand new features.
That's really interesting, Josh. Thanks for that
Yeah.
breakdown. I mean, I don't think that's a sign of I think everyone wants to work on new features because they're exciting, but I think that we see a shift now with 110 where we kind of come back and say, okay, nope, I need to go and verify this to make sure it works a little bit better, make it more robust. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's fantastic. That's just how development cycles go, though. So
Yeah.
for anyone who's listening, like, oh, that's weird, I don't trust 110 because it might be, or 1.9, it might be flaky. Like, that's not really the way to look at it. New features coming in alpha is amazing. Getting them in as early as possible is really great because you get people to use them and get some visibility, and then you get that feedback to make them better. So that's really exciting stuff.
One thing that's obvious, that wasn't obvious to me when I first started, is all the features that you're interested have an alpha or a beta or whatever. It's not this whole release is alpha, this whole release is beta. You could totally use, a feature that in your cluster that's very alpha and rough, but like the next person doesn't use that feature and it's like the most rock solid thing ever. So that wasn't clearly obvious to me when I first started. I kind of, coming from a more traditionalist open source thing, it was like, okay, the odd number releases are the stable ones and the even number ones are the ones that you would trust, and things like that. So
I wouldn't even want to try to do that with Kubernetes. That would be insane.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, like, usually when you come to Kubernetes, any assumptions that you had are completely out the window when you see there's like 900 open pull requests at all times.
Yeah. No, actually, we have one more follow up with the user doing quick start.
Okay, excellent.
So this is for Richard. He wanted to verify that the cluster info.yaml file is from kube control cluster info, and he's supposed to put it in S3.
Yes, that file actually gets put into S3, and that's the one that's pulled out that has the discovery tokens in it to join from the master.
Okay. I told him yes.
Excellent. And he can. We're very responsive on those issues. So if he needs help with something, have him file one on GitHub, and we'll find. We might be able to convince Ralph to join IRC. Who knows?
And I have one more question from IRC.
Sure.
So user James D _, says, how do developers manage common tasks that happen across teams with Kubernetes? Rolling starts, doing canary releases, or do they just use kube control directly? This is another one of those discussion topics, but I thought it was good for this. That is
an interesting one. So Mario, how would you all handle this? Do you do one cluster first and like kick people off of it, or like how did your workflow go?
Sorry, I missed part of that. What was the? Can someone repeat that really quick? Josh, maybe.
Josh, you're muted.
Yeah. I should probably jump in IRC at some point.
Yeah. So, how do developers manage common tasks that happen across teams with Kubernetes? Rolling starts, doing canary releases, or do they just use kube control directly?
At first they're going to use kube control directly, because if you have a hammer, use the hammer. I think that's a hard one, and it really depends on the types of changes that they're testing. The developers that I tend to work with the most do the best they can in saying, okay, I'm the singular person that's going to focus on this testing for this certain type of feature or whatever we're trying to do and how it works in Kubernetes. And they try to take the reins on that. And they pretty much do that with kubectl, right? They use the tool that's easiest for them. So
I would also say this is one of those areas where the add-on tools, both proprietary and open source, have a lot of presence. I mean, effectively, if you look at OpenShift, that's one of the big things that OpenShift adds to Kubernetes in terms of management of that stuff. If you look at who are the frog people?
JFrog.
JFrog. Thank you. If you look at JFrog, that's what they handle.
Factory?
Yeah, Artifactory, right.
Yep.
There's a bunch of other. I mean, basically, managing CI/CD is a place where people create their whole product line that happens to work with Kubernetes.
And I think so. That's why I think it's super important. Like using a VCS to hold assets is awesome, but being careful that multiple people don't run in and try to do something is another question. That's why it's something like Helm. Where it uses Tiller, which there's other ways it can be doing that are better and more secure and coming down the pipe here. But using the resources of, I know what's in the cluster now, I know its current state, this is what it is, and making sure that the end user is aware of that through some sort of really nice utility is kind of the best way to go. Our developers have a ton of ZSH and Bash functions around making it easier to use a little bit as well. So are there definitely tools out there that can make this better and make people's workflows much easier? Yes. But there's always that training time, if you will, the time to ramp up and learn those things and actually deploy them. So
Sweet. And with that, in Slack, we have time for one more before we go into the outro. I'd like to thank everybody who's asked a question so far. Like I said, in the future, we'll have swag for you and all sorts of neat, interesting things. Anyone have the Kubernetes fidget spinner handy? I always say I'm going to bring one, but I don't. But
I don't think anyone here is that cool.
I know. There's one. I knew someone had one.
I don't know where mine is.
Yeah. All right. So a few announcements before we go. Again, thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to be doing this event live at KubeCon in Copenhagen. So we'll actually have a panel. I'll be in the audience with a microphone, and we'll have a panel of experts up on the stage, and you can ask all sorts of questions and things like that. So do join us there if you are going to Copenhagen. Also check out some of the workshops and things like that people are running on Monday. Always good, valuable training that happens around a KubeCon. We'd like to thank the following companies for supporting the community with their developer volunteers for this event: Amazon, Bitnami, Giant Swarm, Heptio, Liquid Web, Northwestern Mutual, Packet.net, Pivotal, Red Hat, Weaveworks, the University of Michigan, and VMware. And lastly, feel free to hang out and hash office-hours. If you have any strong opinions on how you can help Jeff with a question bot so we can collect questions over the course of the month and then kind of spit them all out during the event itself, I think that'll help us become more efficient and spend more time answering questions instead of trying to reach questions from all over the internet. So, and we're also investigating whether streaming the Twitch is a good idea or not. So more to follow. More to follow there. Who knows? It could be great. So with that, thanks to our great panel for joining us, and thanks to all the users. And if you're running this on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and let someone know. And with that, thank you, everybody, and have a good day.
Yep.